Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. The High Court of Arendelle trembled with whispers as Serene Leora stood alone in the center of the marble floor, her hands shaking, her throat tight, her heart burning like someone had reached inside her chest and torn something living from it. Torches crackled along the stone walls, throwing flickering light over the gathered wolves who watched her like a spectacle. Some pitying, some cruel, but all waiting. Alistair Rainwood, the alpha she had loved since they were children, stood tall before the throne, jaw set, eyes cold like he'd carved every warm memory out of himself. "Serene Leora," he declared, voice echoing. "I reject you as my destined mate in front of my pack, my king and the gods who witness." Gasps rippled through the hall. She felt her knees weaken, but she refused to fall, refused to give him the satisfaction. Her wolf clawed inside her chest, wounded, crying, but Serene kept her chin lifted. The humiliation pressed against her skin like a brand. Her entire world collapsed beneath her feet, yet she whispered through trembling lips, words she never imagined she'd speak aloud. The entire court leaned forward, breathless, awaiting her answer. "I accept your rejection, Alpha." Her voice cracked like lightning, sharp, loud, slicing through the hall with a force she did not know she possessed. The torches flickered violently as if reacting to her pain. The crowd went utterly still. Even Alistair's expression faltered for a heartbeat. A crack in the stone, quickly sealed. Serene felt the severing bond tear through her soul like a blade dipped in frost and fire, both. Her lungs seized, her vision blurred, but she did not fall. She would not fall. She stood there with her heart bleeding in silence, the court stunned by the defiance in her breaking voice. No one had expected it. Not from Serene, not the quiet girl who had always bowed her head and swallowed her hurt to protect her family. But this moment burned her from the inside out. She had to speak or be destroyed. Behind Alistair, King Thandor Arendelle shifted on his throne, his ancient golden eyes tightening with something unreadable. And then the room began to change. A rumble, low and dangerous, rolled through the stones under their feet as if the very palace felt the shock of a bond snapped before its time. Alistair opened his mouth as if to speak, perhaps to reclaim control, to re-establish dominance, but the sound never formed. The king suddenly rose from his throne. An icy wind swept across the hall, though no doors were open. Wolves shivered and backed away as King Thandor descended the steps, his boots striking the stone like approaching thunder. His gaze fixed on Serene with an intensity that made her breath hitch, not cold, not warm, but something ancient, evaluating, almost feral. "You accepted the rejection willingly?" he asked, his voice deep enough to vibrate bones. Serene swallowed, forcing her chin up even as tears blurred her vision. "Yes, your majesty." Her voice wavered, but she didn't look away. A murmur broke among the wolves, but Thandor silenced them with a single raised hand. His nostrils flared subtly, as though scenting something in the air. The energy shifted again. Sharper, heavier, layered with something dangerous. Vesper Karis, the king's advisor, stepped forward like a shadow moving in candlelight. His thin smile was wrong. Serene sensed it, even through her anguish. Something about her acceptance had triggered more than heartbreak. Something in this court had woken up. Then it happened. The king's eyes burst into molten gold, glowing so brightly the wolf within him surged so close to the surface that his aura shook the walls. Several wolves dropped to their knees, gasping at the sheer force radiating from him. Even Alistair stepped back, visibly stunned. Serene, caught in his stare, felt her heartbeat slam painfully inside her ribs. King Thandor's voice dropped into a growl as old as the first moon. "Who told you to speak those words, girl? Do you understand what you have triggered?" She shook her head, barely breathing. I spoke them because they were true. The king inhaled sharply, the air crackling with electricity. Vesper Karis stepped closer, whispering urgently into the king's ear, but Thandor snarled and brushed him off. Wolves backed away. Something was wrong. Something was unraveling in real time. Serain felt it in her bones. Her rejection had done something impossible. The king's aura pulsed wildly, his control slipping. His wolf surged for dominance, for release, for something Serain didn't yet understand. The court instinctively bowed, trembling. And then the king lost control. A violent roar ripped from his chest, raw and earth-shaking, shattering the silence and sending cracks racing through the marble floor beneath him. His power exploded outward in waves, slamming into the walls, rattling chandeliers and forcing wolves to their knees. Serain was nearly thrown backward, her hair whipping around her face. The torches extinguished in an instant, plunging half the hall into shadows. King Thandor's transformation rippled beneath his skin, muscles shifting, claws threatening, fangs elongating. But he fought it, shaking violently, gripping the throne so hard it splintered in his hand. "Vesper, get them out!" he bellowed, his voice distorted with the beginnings of a shift he could not stop. Panic erupted as wolves scrambled toward the exits. Alistair turned to flee with them, but his eyes flicked once, quick, unreadable, toward Serain. She stared, frozen as the king's gaze, locked onto her through the chaos, not with hatred, not with rage, but with recognition. Something ancient and forbidden had awakened between them. Before she could move, the king roared again, and the high court of Arendelle plunged into its first moment of true fear in centuries. Serain Leora had not always been the girl who stood alone beneath the crushing silence of a royal court. Once she had been a child who believed that fate was a gentle thing, that the moon never made mistakes, and that the bond she felt for Alistair Rainwood was a promise carved into the stars. She remembered being 10 winters old, racing barefoot through Rainwood Forest with him, laughing as though the world had been built only for their voices. Alistair had been kind then, gentle, warm-eyed, protective in a way that made her believe she mattered. She remembered the day her wolf whispered his name as her mate. She remembered the way her heart had soared. But that was before the years deepened him into a leader, before expectations hardened him, before whispers around the pack began to place him beside Kalindra Vyre instead. And Serain, with her soft nature and quiet loyalty, slowly became a shadow in his world, a memory, a burden, a girl he had outgrown. She just didn't know it yet. Not until everything began to unravel. The unraveling began the winter her family arrived at the Rainwood Pack after losing their old home to rogue attacks. Serain remembered clutching Tavian's hand, promising him safety as snowflakes melted in their hair. The Rainwood Pack was supposed to be sanctuary, but survival often demanded more than hope. They were given a small cottage at the edge of the territory, far from the main homes, far from the warmth of belonging. Even then, Serain didn't complain. She worked the herb fields. She hunted for extra meat so Tavian could grow strong. She offered gratitude for every scrap, every small kindness, and every time Alistair passed by without smiling back at her, she convinced herself he was only busy, only distracted. She didn't see the way Kalindra's eyes followed him, sharp as glass. She didn't know that Vesper Karis, the king's advisor, had already begun visiting the Rainwood lands more frequently, whispering alliances, stirring ambitions that would one day cost Serain everything. Alistair's distance became a wound that never healed. Each festival, each training session, each ritual at the moon altar, he seemed farther from the boy she once knew. Kalindra grew ever nearer, her beauty as crafted as a blade, her confidence sharpened by privilege. She moved through the pack like someone born to be Alpha's mate, and the wolves adored her for it. Serain watched from the margins, offering quiet smiles, quiet gestures, quiet support, always quiet, because she did not know how to fight for something she believed was already hers by fate. When her wolf whispered warnings, Seraine ignored them. When Tavian asked why, Alistair never came to visit anymore. She changed the subject. When Mireille Solène told her gently that love should not feel like starving, Seraine laughed it off. But in truth, she felt the hunger of it every day. A hunger for affection, a hunger for belonging, a hunger for a future she believed destiny still owed her. The first time Alistair truly hurt her was the night of the lunar gathering, when the moon shone bright as polished bone and every wolf danced beneath its blessing. Seraine had braided white moonflowers into her dark hair, hoping, praying, he would look at her the way he did when they were young. But when she entered the clearing, she saw him at the center, Calindra's hand resting gracefully on his arm. The pack cheered as they moved together, their wolves in perfect rhythm, their smiles in perfect harmony. Seraine froze. It felt like her bones turned to ash. She clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, whispering excuses to Mireille, who saw right through her trembling voice. Later that night, when Alistair finally approached her, it was only to ask why she was standing alone in the shadows. His tone was polite, but distant, too distant for a destined mate. And when she tried to speak her heart, he cut her off with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Seraine, don't make this complicated. That was the moment she first tasted the truth. He had already chosen someone else long before he rejected her. But the rejection itself, public, cruel, humiliating, didn't happen until 2 weeks later. The High Court had summoned the pack for a royal inspection, a visit meant to strengthen alliances. Seraine had stood quietly beside Mireille, expecting nothing more dramatic than ritual bows and polite formalities. Instead, Alistair seized the opportunity to sever the bond in front of the king and every wolf present. He didn't warn her, didn't speak to her privately, didn't allow her a moment to breathe before carving the words across her fate. The memory of it haunted her now. The coldness in his eyes, the pride in Calindra's smirk, the approving nod from Vesper, as though Seraine were nothing more than a chess piece removed from the board. She hadn't planned to accept the rejection aloud, but something inside her, something wounded and furious, had awakened. Her acceptance wasn't strategy. It wasn't bravery. It was survival. And yet, none of them expected the king's violent reaction. None of them expected Seraine's pain to stir something ancient in Thandor Arendale's wolf. None of them expected fate to shift in the space between her words and his roar. When the chaos inside the High Court finally settled, Seraine found herself standing in an echoing hallway carved from pale stone, the air cold enough to sting her lungs. Wolves rushed past her, courtiers, guards, frightened Omega servants, everyone desperate to escape the king's uncontrolled surge of power. But she couldn't move. Her legs trembled. Beneath her, her heart racing even though the chamber behind her had fallen silent. Mireille found her first, grabbing Seraine's shoulders with trembling hands, her eyes wide with fear. "Are you hurt?" she whispered, glancing over her shoulder toward the heavy doors. "Seraine, his power. I've never felt anything like it." Seraine shook her head, unable to form words. She didn't understand why the king's gaze had locked onto her, as though she had become something more than a rejected wolf. She didn't understand why his wolf reacted with such fury, why his control shattered the moment her acceptance echoed across the stones. The memory of his glowing eyes burned in her mind, fierce and unsettling. When she closed her eyes, she could still feel the weight of his attention, like fate itself had shifted direction, pointing squarely at her. Inside the court, muffled voices rose again, guards shouting orders, advisors scrambling for explanations, Vesper Karis demanding someone retrieve ancient records. The tension was thick enough to taste, sharp as metal on the tongue. Wolves whispered about omens, curses, forbidden bonds, anything that might explain the king's sudden instability. But Seraine felt none of their speculation mattered. What happened in that moment was not political. It was personal. Deeply, frighteningly personal. Mireille tugged her arm urgently. "We need to leave before they blame you," she whispered. They're already frightened, and frightened wolves look for easy targets. But Serene didn't move. Her mind kept circling back to one horrifying truth. Something inside the king reacted to her acceptance as though it recognized something in her, something she didn't yet know existed. She turned her head sharply when the door slammed open at the end of the hall. Erix Marlowe, captain of the Royal Guard, strode toward them with purposeful steps. His presence sent wolves scattering like startled deer, and he stopped directly in front of Serene. "Serene Leora," Erix said, voice low and controlled, though tension tightened every muscle in his jaw. "His Majesty requests your presence," Mire gasped, pulling Serene instinctively behind her. "She did nothing wrong," Mire argued, fierce despite her fear. "You saw what happened. She wasn't the cause. She was the victim." But Erix shook his head. "This is not an arrest," he said, though the caution in his eyes betrayed how thin that promise might be. "The king needs answers." Serene felt her stomach twist. She didn't want to face King Thandor again. Not like this. Not when she could still feel the echo of his power rattling her bones. But she also knew refusing a summons from the high throne could mean exile or death. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she stepped out from behind Mire. "I'll go." Her voice sounded distant, unfamiliar. Erix's gaze softened, not pity, but something like concern, before he turned and motioned her to follow. As they walked, Serene sensed eyes watching her from doorways and corners, as though the entire palace had become a living witness to something it didn't yet understand. The closer they came to the private chambers beneath the throne room, the heavier the air grew, dense with the scent of storm magic and the pulse of a powerful wolf barely contained. Erix stopped before a massive oak door reinforced with silver bands. "He is calmer now," he said quietly, though the tension in his shoulders suggested otherwise. "But speak truthfully. He will know if you lie." Serene swallowed hard. "What does he want from me?" Erix hesitated, then stepped aside. "That is for him to tell you." The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit chamber warmed by a single hearth. King Thandor stood near the window, his back to her, his posture rigid, his hands gripping the stone ledge hard enough to crack it. When he spoke, his voice was rough and strained. "Enter." The air vibrated with restrained power. Serene stepped inside slowly, the door closing behind her with a weight that sealed her fate. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the king turned, and Serene's heart climbed into her throat. He looked different, not enraged, not out of control, but searching. His golden eyes dimmed to a deep, molten amber as they studied her, not with authority, but with a strange, unsettling curiosity. "What are you?" he asked softly, each word deliberate, controlled. Serene flinched. "I'm a wolf," she whispered, confused. "An ordinary wolf." Thandor stepped closer, and she inhaled sharply as the air thickened around him. "Ordinary wolves do not stir the ancient bond magic of the crown," he said. "Ordinary wolves do not break a rejection with such force that a king loses control." His gaze dropped briefly to her trembling hands. "When you spoke those words, something awakened, something I haven't felt in centuries." Serene shook her head desperately. "I didn't awaken anything. I didn't even want to accept the rejection. I only—" Her voice cracked under the memory. "I only wanted the pain to stop." Thandor's expression softened in a way she hadn't expected. The hardness in him wavered, revealing a man who understood too much about broken bonds and the wounds they left behind. Then he said the words that made her knees weaken. "Serene Leora, I fear your destiny has just collided with mine." Serene stared at the king, her breath trapped somewhere between her ribs and her throat. Destiny was not a word thrown around lightly in the kingdoms of wolves. It was a word carved into prophecy, sealed in blood, spoken only by elders and oracles who saw glimpses beyond mortal sight. "Your destiny collided with mine?" she repeated, the words trembling in her mouth. King Thandor nodded slowly, though his expression revealed he did not entirely believe it himself. When you accepted that rejection, he said, I felt something break inside me, not my control, something older, something dormant. He paced the room, each step heavy with tension. Only once in recorded history has a wolf's pain shaken the thread of sovereigns, the bond that anchors the king to the throne, and it was caused by a wolf whose fate intertwined with the crown. Serene's pulse hammered in her ears. But I am no one, she whispered, a healer's daughter, a girl who blends into shadows. Thandor turned to her sharply. Do not diminish yourself. The moon does not waste power on insignificance. His tone was commanding, but underneath it she sensed something unexpected. Fear. The king, the strongest wolf in the realm, was afraid of what she might be. Before Serene could respond, a soft shuffle echoed outside the chamber. Thandor's head snapped toward the door with a growl vibrating beneath his breath. A moment later, Vesper Karras slipped inside without waiting for permission, his pale eyes glittering with unsettling interest. Your Majesty, he said with a bow too shallow to be respectful, the council is waiting for answers. They fear your moment of instability was an omen. The way he said the word instability made Serene's skin prickle. Thandor stiffened, jaw clenching. My moment was triggered, Vesper, and I am attempting to understand why. Vesper's gaze slid to Serene like a cold blade. Yes, he murmured. The girl. How peculiar. Serene took a step back instinctively. Something about him felt wrong, like a shadow that shifted even when light touched it. Thandor sensed her discomfort. Leave us, he commanded. But Vesper did not move immediately. Instead, he tilted his head, studying Serene with a calculating smile that made her wolf stir uneasily. Be careful, Your Majesty, he said softly. Some threads, once pulled, unravel more than intended. As soon as the door shut behind Vesper, the king exhaled sharply, the air crackling with frustration. Do not trust him, Thandor said. He serves the throne, but his loyalties twist with his ambitions. Serene nodded, though fear continued to flutter in her chest. Why does he care about me? The king considered her for a long moment. Because he felt the shift too, he said. When you accepted the rejection, the veil between the living and the ancestral threads trembled. Vesper studies ancient magics, dangerous ones. Anything unusual captures his hunger for power. Serene wrapped her arms around herself. I didn't mean to cause anything. I didn't mean to unravel fate. Thandor stepped closer, his voice dropping. Fate was unraveling long before you spoke. You simply exposed the tear. His words made her shiver. She searched his face, looking for certainty, for reassurance. But she saw only questions. Questions that terrified him as much as they terrified her. Before she could ask more, a sudden knock rattled the chamber door. Thandor stiffened again. Enter, he growled. Jorn Hallowick, the Pax Beta, stepped inside with urgency clouding his eyes. Your Majesty, Jorn said, bowing before turning to Serene. You are needed immediately. Tavian, your brother, he's in trouble. Serene's heart plummeted. What happened? She demanded, rushing toward the Beta. Jorn hesitated, glancing nervously at the king. It seems there was a confrontation in the courtyard. Some wolves cornered him. They said he shouldn't be here after what happened in the court. Serene's pulse spiked with panic and rage. Without waiting for permission, she shoved past Jorn and sprinted down the hall. Her legs moved with desperate speed, fueled by fear for the one soul she had always sworn to protect. As she reached the courtyard, the scene struck her like a physical blow. Tavian was on the ground, surrounded by 3 older wolves who sneered down at him. Blood stained his lip. His small hand shook as he tried to stand. Say it again, one of them snarled. Your sister brought a curse into the king's hall. Serene's vision blurred with fury. A growl ripped from her throat before she could stop it. The wolves turned, startled, just in time to see her step into the moonlight, with a fury they had never witnessed. The moment her feet touched the courtyard stones, Something inside her flared. Something bright, fierce, ancient. The torches lining the courtyard ignited with sudden intensity, flames rising higher than before. The wolves surrounding Tavian stumbled backward in fear, eyes wide. "Serene!" Tavian breathed, his voice trembling. But she wasn't listening. Her wolf surged beneath her skin, not violently, but with a power she did not recognize. Her heartbeat calmed even as her anger sharpened into something cold and beautiful. The air thickened around her, humming with invisible threads. The 3 wolves collapsed to their knees without being touched, groaning as though an unseen force pressed them down. Serene stared at her hands, horrified. She hadn't shifted. She hadn't even willed power, yet something had answered her pain like a loyal soldier obeying command. Behind her, footsteps pounded the stones. King Thandor appeared in the archway, eyes glowing faintly as he took in the sight, Serene standing in the courtyard's center, like a moonborn tempest. His voice, low and reverent, broke the stunned silence. "Serene Leora," he whispered. "You are not just a wolf. The moon has marked you." Serene felt the world tilt as the king's words echoed through the courtyard. Moonborn. A title whispered only in myths, spoken in quiet reverence beside hearth fires by elders who barely believed the tales themselves. She shook her head, backing away from the wolves still kneeling under the invisible force she had accidentally summoned. "No," she whispered. "I'm not anything. I'm just—" But her voice broke as the torches flared again, reacting not to her fear, but to something deeper within her. Thandor stepped forward, each footfall resonating like a drumbeat. The courtyard fell completely silent, every wolf waiting, breathless, trembling. The Moonborn were said to be born once every few centuries, Thandor said softly, his eyes locked onto hers. A wolf whose soul anchors ancient magic. A wolf who can alter the threads of fate. Serene shook her head fiercely. "Stop! This isn't real. I'm not—" Tavian suddenly threw himself into her arms, sobbing. His small body grounded her, pulling her out of the storm of disbelief. She clutched him tightly, heart twisting at the bruise on his cheek. When she looked back at Thandor, her voice steadied. "I didn't ask for this." He nodded. Fate rarely waits for permission. Jorn and Erix escorted the frightened wolves away, leaving the courtyard still crackling with strange energy. Tavian refused to let go of his sister's hand. Serene stroked his hair, whispering comfort even as her own world shattered. Thandor's gaze remained fixed upon her, unreadable, yet undeniably drawn. "When did you first notice anything unusual?" he asked. She blinked. "Never. Nothing like this has ever happened." Thandor frowned slightly, studying her face as though searching for cracks in stone. Magic does not awaken without reason. Something triggered it. Serene knew what he meant. Her rejection, her breaking, her survival. The bond severed by Alistair had torn something open inside her, something raw and ancient, and the king had felt it. Thandor approached slowly, lowering himself to Tavian's height so he wouldn't appear threatening. "You were brave today," he told the boy gently. Tavian sniffed, but nodded. Serene watched, stunned. The king, feared by nations, softened for her brother. Then Thandor rose again, expression sharpening with resolve. "Serene, you must come with me. There are things you need to learn, things the court will demand answers for." Serene hesitated. Every instinct in her screamed to run, to take Tavian and Mireille, and disappear into the forest where no crown, no prophecy, no ancient thread could claim her. But she knew running would only condemn them all. Tavian squeezed her hand. "I'm not scared if you're with me," he whispered. The simple faith in his voice broke her resolve. She exhaled slowly. "All right," she said. "Tell me what you know." Thandor nodded once and motioned for her to follow him through a narrow stone passageway that spiraled deeper beneath the palace. Mireille appeared at the corridor's end, breathless and frightened, but she allowed Serene a small, shaky smile. Wherever you go, I go, Mireille whispered. Serene's heart warmed with gratitude. Together, the three descended into the lantern-lit depths. The air changed as they walked, growing heavier, older, filled with the scent of cold magic. Thandor finally stopped before a large iron door etched with symbols Serene didn't recognize. He pressed his palm against it. The carvings glowed faintly, unlocking. As the door creaked open, Serene's breath caught. Inside was a chamber filled with scrolls, moonstone relics, and ancient texts older than any pack in the realm. This, Thandor said, stepping inside, is the Archive of Sovereigns. Everything known about the Moonborn is recorded here. Serene stared at the relics, feeling impossibly small. Why are you showing me this? Thandor held her gaze. Because the moment you accepted that rejection, the crown's ancestral bond reacted and chose you as its focal point. Serene's heart stumbled. Chose me for what? Thandor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled a massive dust-covered scroll from the highest shelf. When he unrolled it, Mireille gasped softly. Tavian leaned closer. Serene's pulse quickened as she read the ancient script. When the heart that breaks does not shatter, when the bond that dies awakens power, the Moonborn shall rise. She who endures the wound shall command the threads of kings. Serene backed away, shaking. No, this isn't about me. I want nothing to do with kings or threads, or whatever this prophecy means. Thandor closed the scroll gently. Yet prophecy does not ask if you want it. His eyes darkened with something deeper, something she couldn't name. And there is more. Only a Moonborn can steady the wolf of a king when it nears madness. Silence fell like snow. Serene stared at him, stunned. What do you mean? Thandor inhaled deeply, stripping away the last of his guarded composure. My wolf is old, powerful, and barely contained. For years I have felt the thread fraying, until today. His voice grew softer. When you accepted your rejection, the pull tethered my wolf, calmed him. I have not felt such clarity in decades. Her stomach twisted. So you think I am meant to control you? Thandor shook his head. Not control. Steady. Balance. He took a slow step toward her. Serene, Leora. I survived the throne by force, but I will not survive the prophecy without the one who awakened it. She shook her head again, overwhelmed. I'm just a girl who wasn't wanted. Thandor's eyes softened, truly softened for the first time. Then perhaps the moon chose you, he murmured, because you understand what it means to be broken and still rise. But before Serene could respond, the torches flickered violently. The floor trembled. Someone was coming down the passageway fast, and the scent that drifted in made Serene's blood freeze. Alistair Rainwood had entered the archives. The moment Alistair Rainwood stepped into the Archive of Sovereigns, the air shifted sharply, as if two storms collided in a single room. His gaze locked onto Serene first. Not the king, not the relics, not the ancient prophecy scattered across the table. Her. His chest rose and fell with a tight, uneven breath, as though seeing her here, standing beside the king, wounded him more than losing any battle. Serene, he breathed, voice cracking just slightly. But she felt nothing warm in her chest anymore. Only hollowness, only memory. King Thandor stepped forward, placing himself deliberately between her and Alistair, his presence expanding like a mountain rising from the earth. You should not be here, Thandor growled. Alistair clenched his jaw, but didn't back down. With respect, your majesty, I came for Serene. I heard she was brought below the palace, and I... Serene lifted her chin. You rejected me, she said quietly. Your concern is unnecessary. The words sliced deeper than she intended. Alistair flinched as though she had struck him physically. Serene, things have changed. Serene's eyes hardened. No. You changed them the moment you spoke the rejection. His mouth opened, but Thandor's growl silenced the room. Mind your tongue, Alpha. You forfeited your claim to her. Alistair's wolf flickered through his gaze, furious and shaken. I forfeited nothing, he snapped. She was mine before the prophecy, before your reaction. Mireille moved closer to Serene protectively, Tavian clinging to her cloak. Alistair's eyes darted to the boy, filled with guilt. But his gaze snapped back to Serene quickly, as if afraid she might slip further out of reach. Serene, please, he pleaded, stepping forward despite the pressure of Thandor's aura. I didn't reject you because I didn't want you. I rejected you because I was told. His voice broke again, frustration twisting his features. Serene's heart stumbled for a moment, an echo of the girl she once was, desperate for any sign that he had cared. But scars were powerful things. They reminded you who cut you. You don't get to rewrite the past, Serene whispered, and you don't get to use me for your regrets. Alistair's expression shattered. For the first time, regret, fear, and longing spread openly across his face. Serene, he whispered, I was warned that binding to you would weaken the Rainwood bloodline, that your lineage... Thandor's voice dropped into lethal quiet. Her lineage is blessed, Alistair faltered. Serene's breath caught. Who warned you? She asked, her voice trembling between anger and dread. Alistair swallowed hard. Vesper Karis. The chamber froze. Thandor's hand curled into a fist, moonstone rings digging into his skin. Mireille gasped softly. The name fell like poison into the air. He told me, Alistair continued, that if I claimed you, the king would see it as a threat, that your bloodline carried instability. Serene stepped closer, tears burning behind her eyes, but not the kind that begged for love, the kind that came from betrayal so deep it bent the spine. And you believed him, she whispered, over me, over destiny, over everything we grew up knowing. Alistair's lips trembled. I was trying to protect the pack. No, she said softly. You were trying to protect your status. His face crumpled. Before Alistair could speak again, the torches dimmed suddenly, plunging the chamber into flickering half-light. A cold wind surged through the archive, scattering loose parchment across the stone floor. The glow in the carved symbols above the door trembled. Thandor stiffened instantly. Something is wrong, he murmured. Serene felt it too, a prickling along her spine, like unseen eyes watching from the corners of the room. Tavian whimpered, clinging tighter to her hand. Mireille whispered a quiet prayer under her breath. Then, from somewhere deep within the palace corridors, a distant howl twisted through the stone halls. Not the howl of a wolf greeting the moon, but something warped, pained, hunting. Thandor's eyes flashed gold. The wards have been breached, he growled. Alistair turned sharply toward the sound. Rogues? He breathed. But Thandor shook his head slowly. No, this is darker. His gaze shifted back to Serene. And it is seeking you. Her breath hitched. Why? Thandor answered without hesitation. Because power that awakens draws predators, especially those who feed on fate. Eric's appeared at the entrance, breathless and armed, sweat beading his brow. Your Majesty, he said urgently. The eastern wing is under attack. Shadows, creatures cloaked in them, breach the walls. Wolves can't see them. They move through stone like smoke. Mireille gasped, pulling Tavian closer. Alistair stepped instinctively in front of Serene, his protective instincts flaring far too late. Eric's continued. Vesper is gone. His chambers are empty. The guards he assigned vanished. Thandor's rage spiraled so sharply the relics rattled on their shelves. He brought them here, Thandor growled, voice vibrating like thunder ready to break free. And he is coming for her. Serene's stomach twisted painfully. What does he want from me? She whispered. Thandor turned toward her with a look that was not fear, but dread. A Moonborn can strengthen a king, he said. But in the hands of a dark practitioner, a Moonborn can be sacrificed to steal the king's power entirely. The chamber seemed to shrink. Serene's knees weakened. He wants to kill me. Thandor stepped beside her, his presence steady as a shield. Over my dead body, he whispered. Alistair barely had time to process the king's words before the chamber door shuddered under a force that rattled every relic in the archive. Serene instinctively pulled Tavian behind her, while Mireille pressed her back against a shelf of moonstone fragments that chimed like fragile bells. Thandor motioned sharply for silence, his senses sharpening as he extended his aura outward like an invisible net. The torches along the walls flickered violently, their flames twisting sideways as if sucked toward the door. Something beyond it was drawing the heat from the air, feeding on it. Serene felt the cold press against her skin, a cold that did not belong in any physical world. Erix drew his blade, the metal glowing faintly under the magical carvings etched into its length. "They're here," he muttered. Alistair stepped to Serene's other side, his wolf rising so fiercely she felt the heat of it burning through his control. Thandor planted himself before them all, his shoulders tensing as the shadows seeped inward beneath the door like living ink. When the door finally blew open, it wasn't by hands or claws, but by darkness itself tearing through the wood. The creatures that emerged did not have solid forms. Their bodies twisted and elongated like smoke caught in storm winds, forming half shapes of wolves with hollow eyes and jagged silhouettes that flickered between presence and absence. Their growls vibrated like distant thunder rolling through a cavern. Serene's wolf whimpered inside her, not from fear, but from recognition. These things were not alive. They were remnants, fractured spirits tethered to dark magic, enslaved to carry out a master's will. "Vesper," Thandor growled. The shadows lunged forward without hesitation. Thandor met the first wave with a burst of golden energy that filled the chamber with blinding light. His wolf's power crackled through the air, shattering one creature into drifting dust, but two more slipped beneath the attack, darting toward Serene with haunting speed. Alistair shifted partially, claws bursting from his hands as he slashed through the nearest shadow. The blow split the creature into ribbons of black mist, but instead of dying, it reformed behind him. "They don't break," Alistair snarled. Erix hurled a silver lace spear, pinning one to the stone floor. The creature writhed, hissing like steam. Serene froze as another shadow glided directly toward her, its whispery form reaching out with elongated fingers made of swirling darkness. Tavian screamed her name. Mireille shouted for her to run, but she couldn't move, not because she was afraid, but because something inside her pulsed in rhythm with the creature's approach, as if the bond of fate tugged her toward confrontation. Her heartbeat shifted to a strange, slow pulse. The air around her thickened. Light gathered beneath her skin like a hidden ember suddenly stirred. The shadow reached her, yet the moment its form brushed her arm, a violent burst of silver light erupted from her body, blasting the creature across the archive like a rag doll hurled by an unseen titan. Thandor's head snapped toward her. Alistair recoiled, eyes wide. The remaining shadows screeched, recoiling as though her very presence burned them. Serene stared at her, glowing, hands horrified and awed. "I didn't mean to," she stammered, but Thandor stepped between her and the shadows, his voice a deep command. "Do not fear your power. Use it." Serene didn't know how, but instinct rose in her like a tide, ancient and undeniable. She lifted her trembling hand again, and the symbols on the archive walls began to glow in response, humming softly. The shadows sensed the growing power and swarmed toward her, abandoning all others in the chamber. Thandor lunged to shield her, but Serene shook her head sharply. "Let me try," she whispered. Alistair shouted her name in warning, trying to break free from another shadow wrapping around him like thick smoke, but Erix held him back with a hand on his shoulder, eyes fierce. "If the prophecy is true," Erix said, "you cannot protect her from what she is meant to face." Serene stepped forward, meeting the swirling mass of shadows head-on. For a heartbeat, the room fell silent. Then she inhaled deeply, gripping the memory of every tear she had shed, every humiliation she had endured, every wound that had tried to break her, but failed. The moment she exhaled, silver-white light exploded outward from her chest, shooting across the archive in a radiant wave. The shadows shrieked as the light consumed them, dissolving their forms into shimmering particles that drifted like dying stars. When the last shadow faded, the chamber went still. Dust sparkled in the air where the creatures had dissolved, floating gently before settling onto the stone floor. Serene staggered, nearly collapsing as the last of her power drained from her limbs. Thandor caught her before she fell, his arms steady and warm despite the lingering chill in the room. His gaze held something reverent, something shaken. "You did what only a Moonborn can," he whispered. Serene pulled away weakly, staring at her hands as if they no longer belonged to her. "I don't want this," she whispered brokenly. "I didn't ask for it." Thandor's expression softened. "Neither did I when the crown chose me." Alistair took a step forward, sorrow and desperation clouding his eyes. "Serene, please let me speak." She shook her head. "Not now." Mireille and Tavian rushed to her side, Mireille holding her up while Tavian clutched her cloak tightly, eyes wide with worry and wonder. Erix approached cautiously. "Your Majesty, there is more. The shadows were only the first wave. The palace scouts report movement in the outer woods. Someone, or something, is approaching." Thandor straightened, his wolf rising beneath his skin like a rising storm. A chilling silence spread through the archive as Thandor's gaze slid toward the stairwell. His voice was calm, but deadly. "Vesper Karis has not finished his hunt." Serene felt her trembling begin anew, fear threading through her bones. Not fear for herself, but fear for Tavian. Fear for Mireille. Fear for the kingdom now tangled in prophecy. Because of her existence, Thandor turned to her with full authority, his presence enveloping her like a fortress. "Serene Leora, you are no longer safe within these walls, and neither is anyone beside you." He extended his hand, not as a king, but as a wolf offering allegiance. "You must come with me. The palace will fall before dawn if Vesper reaches his full power, but if you stand with me, prophecy says the kingdom will stand." Serene looked at his hand, heart pounding. Behind her she felt Alistair's gaze filled with regret and longing, but she did not turn toward him. She did not need the past. She needed courage. Slowly, terrified, trembling, but resolute. Serene placed her hand in the king's, and the moment their skin touched, the ancient archive lit with silver fire. Silver fire raced along the walls of the archive the moment Serene's hand touched the king's. The ancient carvings glowed brighter and brighter until the whole chamber illuminated with moonlit brilliance. Tavian gasped, clutching Mireille's arm as dust lifted from the floor in swirling spirals. Even Thandor seemed stunned, though he kept Serene's hand firmly in his grasp. "The bond," he murmured, his voice low with awe. "The moon recognizes you." Serene felt the magic pulse between their joined palms, a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, steady and warm, nothing like the terrifying surge she experienced in the high court. This was different, familiar, almost. Thandor released her slowly, as if afraid the world would break again if he moved too quickly. The glowing walls dimmed to a soft silver hum. "We cannot stay here," Thandor said, his voice deepening. "Vesper will use the shadow breach to enter the palace fully. He will come for you first." Erix stepped forward, placing a hand on his chest. "Your Majesty, we've evacuated the western wing. The guards are forming a perimeter outside the northern wall, though they can't hold long without your command." Thandor nodded. "Then we move." The king led them out of the archive into a narrow corridor lit only by trembling lanterns. Every stone seemed to hold its breath. Every shadow felt too deep, too alive. Mireille held Tavian close as they hurried up the winding staircase. Alistair walked behind Serene, silent but vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. Once she might have taken comfort in his presence. Now she felt only the ache of distance, like a door permanently closed. When they reached the main hall, smoke curled across the ceiling. Wolves sprinted through the corridors, carrying injured packmates, shouting alerts, dragging silver barricades into place. Thandor extended his aura outward, his presence powerful enough to sweep silence across the chaos. "Fall back to the eastern wing," his voice thundered. "Protect the civilians first. Warriors form a double line at the courtyard gate." Wolves obeyed instantly, their movement shifting into coordinated precision. Serene had never seen leadership like his, raw strength softened by responsibility, sharpened by necessity. Thandor turned to her. "Stay close. The shadows cannot reach you if my wolf stands between you and them." She opened her mouth, then hesitated. "And if they reach you?" His jaw tightened. "Then prophecy will decide whether I fall." They reached the palace courtyard, where the night sky churned with clouds as thick as smoke. The moon struggled behind them, flickering through the darkness like a failing lantern. Wolves formed defensive lines along the perimeter, their growls vibrating through the stone. Joran Hallowick approached, face pale beneath streaks of dirt. "The northern gate collapsed," he reported. "Something tore through the iron." Thandor's eyes gleamed gold, fury rising. Vesper used shadow forging. Serene shivered at the word. Mireille whispered, "What does that mean?" Thandor answered, "He has taken pieces of the ancestral threads and twisted them into weapons." As if summoned by his explanation, a deep rumble shook the ground. Silence fell. Then from the forest beyond the palace walls, an enormous shadow rose, towering, shifting, shaped like a wolf, but stretched unnaturally, its eyes hollow voids. Its breath gusted across the trees, frost spreading in waves. Tavian whimpered, burying his face into Serene's cloak. Thandor stepped protectively before them, power radiating from him like volcanic heat. "This is no ordinary spirit," he said. "He has summoned a devourer." Serene's heart dropped. Devourers were legends told to frighten pups, shadow creatures that consumed magic itself. The devourer lunged toward the palace, its massive form sliding across the stone courtyard like liquid night. Wolves scattered, some slamming into walls, others rolling aside just in time. It didn't strike with claws or teeth. It struck with gravitational force, pulling light, warmth, and breath toward its hollow core. Serene staggered as the air was ripped from her lungs. Mireille clutched Tavian, shielding him with her own body. Alistair roared, partially shifting as he slammed his claws into the ground to anchor himself. Thandor moved like lightning. With a single leap, he landed between the devourer and his people, releasing a shockwave of golden energy that pushed the creature back. For a moment, the night brightened around him, but the devourer recovered quickly, twisting its head with a haunting screech. "Serene," Thandor called out without turning. "Your magic reacts to mine. You must focus on the bond you awakened." She shook her head, trembling. "I don't know how," Thandor growled. "You knew in the archive." Serene swallowed, remembering the silver light, remembering how it felt, like drawing strength from the broken pieces inside her, not despite them, but because of them. She closed her eyes, letting her pain surface. Something flared inside her, a tiny ember flickering, fragile. She breathed into it, fed it, let it rise. When she opened her eyes, the devourer was rushing toward Thandor again, its hollow mouth opening into a spiraling void. Without thinking, Serene stepped forward. The earth vibrated beneath her feet as light surged through her veins, gathering behind her skin like a sunrise trapped inside her bones. "Stop!" she cried. The light burst outward, forming a barrier between the devourer and the king. The creature collided with it violently, shrieking as cracks spread across its shadowy form. Wolves gasped. Alistair stared breathless. Tavian whispered, "She's glowing." Serene gritted her teeth as the force pushed against her barrier, her arms trembling. Thandor moved beside her, placing his hand over hers. Their power merged instantly, gold and silver intertwining into blinding brilliance. The devourer tried to retreat, but their combined strength struck like a celestial spear, tearing through its core. The creature convulsed, howling in fractured agony before dissolving into a storm of dark mist that scattered into the cold wind. Silence fell as the last traces faded. Serene collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. Thandor knelt beside her immediately, his hand steady on her back. "You did it," he murmured, awe woven through his voice. She shook her head weakly. "We did it." Wolves across the courtyard stared, not with fear, but with reverence, with recognition, with something that felt dangerously close to devotion. But not everyone shared it. At the far end of the courtyard, standing in the shadow of the ruined gate, Vesper Karis finally revealed himself. Cloaked in swirling darkness, eyes glowing with stolen power, he lifted a hand toward Serene. Slow, deliberate, terrifyingly calm. "The Moonborn rises," he whispered, his voice echoing across the stone. "And tonight, I will claim what destiny promised me." Thandor rose, placing himself between Serene and the approaching darkness. His wolf surged beneath his skin, stretching, growling, ready to break free. But Vesper only smiled. Then, with a snap of his fingers, the crown embedded into Thandor's aura shattered, cracking like glass, and the king staggered with a gasp. The kingdom trembled with him. The sound of the crown shattering was not the clang of metal hitting stone. It was deeper, older, like the breaking of a vow whispered by ancestors. Serene felt its echo ripple through the air, a shockwave that made the wolves around her drop to their knees. Thandor staggered as though someone had torn the spine from his power. His breath hitched, his aura flickering like a candle smothered by wind. "No," Eric's whispered, horror filling his voice. The devourer had been terrifying, but this was worse. Without the crown's ancestral thread, the king's wolf had nothing to anchor it. Serene reached for him instinctively as Vesper stepped forward, darkness swirling. Around his hands like living serpents. "Do you see now?" Vesper crooned. "He is no king without the bond. But you—" His pale eyes slid to Serene with hungry fascination. "You shine even when broken." Serene turned her body slightly, shielding Tavian behind her. Thandor braced himself against a fragment of fallen wall, his chest rising in shuddering breaths. She could feel his wolf clawing for stability, slipping deeper into chaos. This was what Vesper wanted. To leave Thandor hollow. To steal the power fate had denied him. Alistair moved first. With a roar, he lunged at Vesper, claws extended, every muscle in his body snapping with fury. But Vesper flicked his wrist casually. A wave of darkness slammed into the Alpha, hurling him across the courtyard like a broken spear. He hit the ground hard, rolling until Eric's caught him before he fell unconscious. Mireille cried out. Tavian screamed. Vesper stepped deeper into the moonlight, his body elongating with shadows that flickered like smoke twisting into monstrous shapes. "You cannot win," he said softly, almost pityingly. He gestured toward Thandor, was merely the vessel you were meant to complete. But fate chose poorly. The king is weak. You, however, his voice dropped into a whisper dripping with hunger, you are power unbound. Serene shook her head, fury and fear burning equally in her veins. "I will never belong to you." Vesper smiled. "Then you will die before the king does." The air around him condensed into a blade of pure shadow. Serene stepped back instinctively as he raised it, aimed not at her, but at Thandor. Instinct overrode thought. Serene sprinted toward the king just as Vesper hurled the shadow blade. The world blurred. She threw herself in front of Thandor, bracing for the impact. But the moment the blade touched her skin, her power erupted. Silver light exploded from her body like a star tearing itself open, halting the blade midair. It melted into dust. Vesper hissed, recoiling. The ground beneath Serene cracked as symbols she had never learned ignited under her feet. Ancient markings glowing brilliantly, responding to her heartbeat. Thandor stared at her, shaken to his core. "Serene, you're stabilizing my wolf." Indeed, the wild, frantic energy radiating from him began to calm, drawn toward her like a tide responding to the moon. Her power wrapped around him gently, anchoring him the way the ancestral thread once had. "I don't know how I'm doing this," she whispered, trembling. "It doesn't matter," Thandor said, rising slowly to his feet. "Right now, you are the only thing keeping the throne, and me, from collapsing." He stepped beside her, their energy intertwining instinctively. They stood shoulder to shoulder, one king and one Moonborn against the rising dark. Vesper's expression hardened. Enough of this charade. He spread his arms wide, summoning the full force of the shadow magic he had stolen. The sky itself dimmed as a vortex of darkness formed above the courtyard, swirling, stretching, warping the moonlight into tendrils of night. Wolves across the palace cried out, some collapsing, some clutching their chests as the magic drained the air. "He's drawing from the ancestral plane," Eric shouted. "If he tears through, he'll unleash every corrupted spirit trapped there." Panic spread like wildfire. Serene's legs shook, but she forced herself to stand firm. Thandor reached for her hand, not as a king clinging to fate, but as a wolf choosing his equal. "Serene Leora," he said, voice steady despite the storm. "Your power is fueled by emotion, by truth, by the part of you that refuses to break." She swallowed hard, remembering every wound, every betrayal, every moment she chose to survive anyway. "What do I do?" she whispered. "You rise," Thandor answered. "You rise and let the moon see you." She faced the vortex, heart pounding. For the first time, she did not run from the power inside her. She embraced it. The moon burst through the clouds in a sudden beam of white light, bathing Serene in a glow so bright it turned her hair into strands of silver fire. Her chest warmed, then blazed as power surged upward, answering her call. The symbols beneath her feet expanded, spiraling outward in lines of radiant magic. Vesper snarled and hurled a torrent of shadow toward her. But Serene lifted her hands and released every fractured piece of her heart, every tear Alistair never saw, every bruise life had given her, every wound that tried to define her. Her pain became her strength. Her strength became light. A wave of pure silver erupted from her palms, colliding with Vesper's shadow storm. The impact shook the palace foundations. Wolves shielded their eyes from the blinding eruption. For a moment, the world turned white. Then Serene stepped forward, pushing harder, her voice rising in a cry that was neither human nor wolf. It was something older than both. Her light engulfed Vesper, unraveling the shadows around him layer by layer. He screamed, a sound of fury, disbelief, and despair. "No!" His body twisted as the last of his stolen power evaporated. And then, like dust swept away by the wind, Vesper Karis vanished. When the last trace of Vesper's darkness dissolved into the wind, silence fell like snow, the kind of silence that follows miracles. Wolves across the courtyard slowly rose from where they'd fallen. The night air felt clean for the first time in days, free of rot, free of fear, alive with a strange new stillness. Serene stood at the center of it all, her arms trembling, her skin still faintly glowing with the silver remnants of power. Her breath came in short gasps. Tavian rushed to her first, throwing his arms around her waist and sobbing against her. She bent down, clutching him tightly, pressing her lips to the top of his head. "It's over," she whispered, not yet believing it. Mireille ran to them next, tears shining in her eyes as she helped steady Serene. Around them, wolves knelt, not just in awe, but in reverence. Even those who had once whispered that she was nothing now bowed their heads, as though the moon herself stood in front of them. Alistair lingered at the edge of the courtyard, battered and silent, watching the girl he'd once discarded become the light that saved them all. Thandor approached slowly, his aura no longer unstable, but whole. He moved not as a man bound by a shattered crown, but as a king no longer ruled by it. He stopped before Serene, his golden eyes filled with something deeper than admiration. Respect, gratitude, understanding. "You steadied me," he said quietly, "even when I had nothing left to stand on." Serene looked up at him, unsure how to carry the weight of his gaze. I didn't mean to. He smiled faintly. Neither did I, once. Then he knelt. The king of Arendelle, sovereign of wolves, bent one knee before the girl who had once been no one, and in doing so he offered her something no title could: choice. The Moonborn is not a weapon, he said so every wolf could hear. She is not a prophecy to be claimed. She is not mine, nor anyone's. His voice softened. But if she stands beside me by her own will, then the kingdom will rise stronger than ever before. Serane's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined herself here, not loved, not chosen, not powerful. But now she had all three. She turned to the wolves who had gathered, to the young ones peering from balconies, to the guards standing in awe, to the elders who once pitied her silence. I was rejected, she said softly. I was left behind, but I rose anyway. Her voice gained strength, because what was broken in me became the very thing that let the light in. The crowd stilled, held in her words like leaves in windless air. We are not only what we lose, she said. We are what we choose to protect, even after the world tells us we shouldn't have survived. Wolves bowed in unison, not by command, but by conviction. Behind her, Alistair finally stepped forward, his face raw with emotion. Serene, he said, voice barely above a breath. I was wrong. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Then she nodded. Yes, you were. He lowered his eyes, accepting what she gave him. Not hatred, not forgiveness, just truth. That was all that remained between them now, and it was enough. Sometimes the greatest healing was letting go of what once felt like the only future. That night, under the restored moon, Serene stood beside Thandor as a new vow was spoken. Not a binding one, not one forced by prophecy, but one made from the ruins of choice. I do not ask you to be queen, Thandor said, only to walk beside me, as yourself. She took his hand. Not because she needed his crown, but because he had never tried to steal her light. Because he had seen the fire in her and never tried to control it. Then I walk with you, she said. The wolves howled, not out of duty, but joy, and the palace echoed with a new sound, hope. In the days that followed, the kingdom rebuilt. The ancestral threads mended themselves slowly, strengthened not by tradition, but by change. Tavian returned to his studies under the court's protection. Mireille was named a guardian of the Moonborn, and Alistair, stripped of title but not purpose, left the court quietly to find who he might be without power. Serene watched him go with no bitterness. His chapter in her story had ended, and she was writing the rest in her own name. Many years later, when the children of Arendelle asked their mothers about the night the court went silent and the king lost control, they were told the story of a girl with nothing but her heart. A girl who was rejected, humiliated, nearly destroyed, but who looked fate in the eye and said, I accept your rejection, and I rise anyway. They were told of the fire that lived beneath her silence, of the silver light that bent shadows to their knees, and of the king who found his salvation not in strength, but in the girl no one had seen coming. Her name became legend, not because she was flawless, but because she was broken and brave at once. Not because she was chosen, but because she chose herself. And so the tale passed from generation to generation. The Moonborn who turned rejection into fire. The girl who stood where kings bowed. The one who saved the realm, not with destiny, but with choice. And the moon, ever watchful, burned brighter every time her name was spoken. Serene Leora, the last wolf to ever be underestimated. If you felt Serene's strength, if her journey touched something deep inside you, then don't leave just yet. Tell me in the comments, what part of her story hit you the hardest? Was it the moment she accepted her rejection, the king losing control, or the night she rose as Moonborn? Your thoughts, your theories, your emotions, I want to read them all. And if you want chapter 2, 3, or a full sequel, make some noise below. Hit the like button so more people can find this story, and subscribe if you want more powerful, emotional werewolf tales just like this. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling with me, and until next time, remember, even when the world rejects you, rise anyway.